were the only university at the time, the only group that seemed to be interested. So I told Joe Wolf, I said, yeah, we'll do that, but we're going to add a control group. So we studied how long they live and their habits and whether they smoked and drank and all the weight gain and so on over the years of the former athletes, and then we matched them with a control who was in the same class at Michigan State, but who did not participate in athletics. And that was the reason I went down there, because of my interest from Sid Robinson in exercise physiology. I thought this is the only place that they have a real laboratory. So, because I was under the GI Bill, I could have gone anywhere, you know. So I went down to work with Curitin.
Yeah.
And so that's how that came about.
It was published by the Blakiston division of McGraw-Hill.
Isn't it interesting? Later, then you would be back with McGraw-Hill.
Yeah. My editor at that time at Blakiston division was Bill Keller. And so I started to think about it. I started to write about it. And this eventually resulted in my producing the book, which was Medical Care of the Athlete. That was my first book. I came from a family on my father's side. Everybody was an athlete in my father's family. And so I grew up among athletes, and I participated in all kinds of sports.
At World War II.
Oh yeah,
this is right in the middle of it.
Middle of World War II.
Yeah.
And I was very anxious to get into it. I wanted to be a part of it, and so I trained as a pilot and ended up as a pretty good pilot, I guess, because I moved up through the different stages of pilot training in single seat Harvards, and which maybe was a very famous old trainer.
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to be a biologist, and so I went to Queen's University in honored in biology, and got a BA, and then left and taught high school for 4 years. We've really, I think, made quite a bit of progress in understanding what are real age-related changes that are immutable and you have no control over them. Skip Knutkin at the Past Presidents luncheon at noon today, I think he said I was member 265 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
So I think it was in 1968, if you have a list of when Carl Blythe was president.
Yeah, I have it over there, but...
Anyway, Carl Blythe, well, let me go back. When you joined the American College of Sports Medicine, you were automatically subscribed to a journal that came out of Italy.
Oh, yeah.
Which was the Journal of Sports Medicine
and Physical Fitness.
And Physical Fitness.
Called, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we all got that. It was not a very high quality journal, and it was a real mixture of articles. And Carl Blythe had really great vision, and he determined, or he raised the question, he says, why do we have this subscription to that? Why don't we have our own journal? For Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise, I have the article on page 1 of volume 1, number 1. Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
Beginning with the olden times first, I joined in 1961 at the urging of Peter Karpovich.
It was a lot for the various associate editors to handle. But we didn't have as many associate editors as there are now. If you look at the editorial board of this, there are
a lot.
It's rather extensive. I can remember very many discussions on that particular topic, as well as several letters to try to convince the promotion committee that this individual's publications warranted respect because it was being reviewed rigorously by medicine and science people.
Okay. After I got to Ball State, you know, I was looking around for funding. I started doing dehydration studies on wrestlers, and then it became obvious that rehydration became an issue, and so I did probably the first study for Gatorade when it was owned by Stokely Van Camp, and as a result of that, I began to get a lot of opportunities to do work on rehydration because the drink industry was just getting popularized and nobody was doing anything in that area.
And then we would get at least 3 or 4 reviewers for each of those sections so that each abstract was being reviewed by at least 2 or 3 people that were highly qualified in that area, or at least reasonably qualified to be able to give an expert opinion as to whether it was, you know, worthwhile to be presented at the annual meeting. That of course has changed now, where anybody that is in a fellow status can come on board and you know, have their abstracts accepted and everything. There's not that critical review process that used to go on. There was a strong push towards Kansas City, and we were very close to making that decision when Indianapolis sort of popped up, and it was really an exciting time to see that transition and that possibility, and to just realize how much the college had grown in such a short period of time.
I was in the first group along with Mike Pollock and some of the others, and we went out to Aspen. And at that time, some of the people in the board were complaining that we were going there to ski.
Right. And this was Balky's thing.
But you know, we were going there to ski, but we were paying our own way.
Yeah.
And so we would work in the morning and then go ski and then come back and work in the afternoon and go out to dinner. So I've been involved with that, you know, with the certification and with the international relations a lot. And then I was president in '79. Sam Fox, and we did a literature review on physical activity and cardiovascular health, and it was one of the first to kind of bring everything together. And that was, we were invited to put that into the American Journal of Cardiology, and it also, I had sent in the 3 papers from my doctoral dissertation. So the first 4 papers of the issue
were all yours?
Were all mine.
Primarily my research then had to do with shunt detection in the heart, where the holes in the heart and see where the oxygen flow was changing and things of that nature, and to develop some of those things at that a long time ago. And Mike took me along at that time. I was one of about 3 or 4 physicians involved in this 18 people, which include most of the people you know and probably a half of the vice.
Oh yeah,
A third of it, 2/3, well, a third or a half or 2/3 would probably have become presidents of the organization.
Yeah, those were very important meetings.
Yeah, it was, and that kind of got me, you know, thinking more back in the physiologic situation of exercise as opposed to just the cardiovascular things. It kind of grew out of that, but that's
what was then called the Heart Disease Control Program of the Public Health Service.
That was with Bob Bruce, too?
So I went, and I actually stayed, this was in Washington, D.C. So I went into Washington and spent a couple years in the Public Health Service. And emerged out of that was the need to have some, you know, guidelines for what we then knew about physical activity. And so Jim Lovell, the astronaut at that point, replaced Bud Wilkinson as the
President's
Council on Physical Fitness. And I had known Jim through the work we'd been doing at NASA. So I took an appointment in the President's Council on Physical Fitness.
It's right out of my training, but I was a guy, and I learned by on-the-job training. And it was fun. I did it. I enjoyed it, and all the sports. It wasn't just football, basketball, all the sports. When I came back from the Navy, there's Cleveland State University is a state university which is downtown. I was involved with them and became their team doctor. And then he called me up and says, "Bergfeld, I need a orthopedic surgeon. Would you be willing to see the players?" Well, I'll think about that. Yes, I said yes. So the next year, '76, I was on the sidelines with Dr. Ippolito, and then he said, "John," it was sort of like a trial, I'm sure. I'm tired of doing this job. I want you to be the team doc." So I said, well, that was great. And by then I knew what I was getting into.
I was editor for 12 years. So yes, 89 to 2000. We call it medicine and science and sports, but there weren't any medicine papers. There were no clinicians actually submitting papers. And so we did that segmenting of the paper, of the journal, and then I sort of recruited some of the physicians now to start to get their residents to put their research in, beginning the team physician type certification program or courses. And that led me to say we need to really give them an outlet.
At the time that I went to the Institute, and I still have a slide on this, one of the exercise physiology books of the 50s stated that women essentially were over the hill at age 15. Their ability for aerobic exercise, fitness, decreased after the age of 15. And you know, it teaches you a lesson as you look back on some of these, shall we say, errors of judgment. But it was pre-Title IX days.
Yeah, because
before
that was
women really were
70s.
getting into sport even.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't that the men were actively being chauvinistic, just they weren't used to having us around.
Yeah.
But really, I owe a lot to Jack Wilmore, because he invited me, I think it was in the early 70s, to write a chapter on women in exercise. And I think that's the first time that my name got out beyond the confines of Santa Barbara.
Under my era, and I would say to some extent under my leadership, I was a strong component of increasing the participation in the college of clinicians of fitness. There was a strong feeling at one point that an exercise physiologist was someone who had a PhD in exercise physiology or exercise sciences and practice at a high academic level. And we began to push for the participation in the American College of Sports Medicine of the clinicians of fitness, the Americas, on the FIMS board. I'm the vice president for the Americas on the FIMS board. And previously I was chair of the Education Commission, and I've been involved with FIMS for probably 12, 15 years now, and nominated by the American College of Sports Medicine.
ACSM decided that they were going to support an effort, and I don't know that they were quite sure what that effort was originally, but to try to bring some guidelines to this new area of cardiac rehabilitation. Well, I was born and brought up in South Africa, and there are two things that you get involved in South Africa.
I can guess what this is going
Politics and sport.
Through the work with the National Center for Catastrophic Sports Injuries Research, we really have looked at every sport, male and female, in which there's a high incidence of head injury, and looked at it from the standpoint of what can be done to prevent these injuries, what kind of rules changes, equipment changes are appropriate, and also educational efforts, both to the coaching, the training staffs, the medical staffs, as well as the athletes themselves. Yes, one of the roles that I serve currently is Vice President of NOCSE, the National Organization for Certification of Athletic Equipment.
Oh, good. I wasn't even aware of that group. So
that group certifies a lot of sports equipment, but certainly football helmets are the highest profile equipment that they certify, and manufacturers have to manufacture that equipment to certain standards.
Well, I think the project that resulted in that paper was, in a sense, almost inevitable, because our perceptions of what the public should do with regard to exercise it really had I think evolved to the point where they were inconsistent with some of the science. And of course his wife was Josephine Rathbone, who was still a founding member of the Board of Trustees when I eventually made it onto the board of ACSM.
I interviewed her.
Well, it goes back to the fundamental studies of Morris and Paffenbarger and Taylor and Montoy, that the evidence base began to build and became too compelling really to be ignored.
Any longer.
And then I will put in a plug there for Dr. David Satcher, who was the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the early 1990s. And he took the request to the Secretary of HHS that there be a Surgeon General's report on physical activity. By the late 70s, and then I spent time at Stanford on a sabbatical leave, and became friends with Dr. Paffenbarger. And then sometime, probably in your first meeting, might have been 1980, 81, something like that.
Could have been.
But I said, you know, you really need to come to this meeting. You'll enjoy it, and come and present your work, because ACSM will greatly benefit from hearing your story. And I think the first one was Nashville.
And the next thing I knew, I had a postdoc out at the Institute of Environmental Stress.
Fantastic.
And I didn't work with Barbara. I actually did my own work, because Steve Horvath had been a biochemist, and he was really interested in the work I did, so I had a big section of the biochem lab. And I did some experiments, and after that meeting, Tipton in Ghisolfi, Carl Ghisolfi, asked me if I'd be willing to join a new endeavor. They were forming the foundation to get research grants for the college, and would I be willing to work on a committee of setting up the research review committee, the first one for the college.
The thing is that when I was at Stanford, and I ran the Beta Breakers in 1977, I believe it was, and somebody died in that race. And I was very interested in that. That was quite shocking to me. And there was a guy at Stanford named Michael Stern who had collected some runners who had dropped dead. He had collected this group. But he hadn't had the time to write it up. So he asked me if I would write it up. So I took and collected a few more. And there was a total of 18 runners who dropped dead running. Now, this was the time when people thought, oh, if you can run, you know, you're never going to have a problem. Yeah. In 1972, I wanted to run in the Olympic trials. So my wife consented to our renting a house 6 miles from the hospital. So I would, during my 3rd year of medical school, no matter what the weather was, I would run to that hospital. And I could get off at 11 at night.